Hello peeps, say hello to my little friend. So this is my book, Echoes of Resistance, Stories from the Frontlines. It's a collection of short stories, and I'm going to read a passage from one of these today, from a story called To Boldly Go. And the passage I'm going to read is the opening scene, and it's set in Bolton, 1896. And it concerns the events around the Winter Hill mass trespass. So this is that story. To Boldly Go. Over Smithil's Moor, a kestrel hovered into the wind in a sky filled with brooding grey clouds, threatening to release a deluge on anyone travelling over Winter Hill. The bird's steadfast gaze drilled into the heather below until, failing to see anything to sate its hunger, it let the wind take it a short way across the moor. Spotting another promising patch of hunting ground, the falcon again turned to hover in search of its prey. Walking up Cold Peak Road, John Weaver pointed out the kestrel to his wife, Margaret. It was mid-August, but the northerly wind brought a chill, so John's overcoat was buttoned up and his flat cap was in his pocket to prevent a gust of wind from taking it. Margaret's shawl was wrapped close around her head and neck. Looking down the road behind them, the industrial might of Bolton was laid out. Tall, slender chimney stacks peppered the scene, with a few billowing their usual dirty grey pillars of smoke. Church bells pealed in the distance, calling the faithful to prayer, ensuring idle hands released from the satanic mills were not employed in the devil's workshop. The industrial scene stretched patchily to Manchester, behind which rose the Pennines. Bathed in glorious sunshine, those eastern hills looked a far more appealing prospect than the hill between them and Margaret's mother in Belmont. Look there, Marge, do you see? The bird hovering? It's a falcon, isn't it? Yes, a kestrel. Amazing birds the way they hover like that, not budging an inch even when the good wind gusts. The library book on falconry he'd just returned had a whole chapter devoted to them. They were one of the few birds of prey that could hover like that while hunting, and one of the best birds to learn falconry with. They called it the sport of kings, but working men did the tricky bit of training the birds. He smiled at the thought of launching a kestrel from his arm and seeing it soar over open moorland hunting its prey. They're a good bird to learn falconry with. They're easier to keep and feed as well with the size of them. Margaret shook her head and smiled. She knew what was coming. Easy to keep and feed, maybe, but how much do they cost? The only bird we can afford is a free one. Well, the book didn't cover prices, and I suspect buying one from the breeder would be expensive. Best bet would be to catch a young one wild, or maybe raid a nest for eggs and raise the chicks. The book really didn't go into how to rear them either, but all right. If you can work out how to catch one, we can keep it, Margaret said, putting her arm through John's and tugging it. But you will have to keep it in the backyard. I could modify the ferret hutch, John said, pulling Margaret towards him to kiss her cheek. No, it's half rotten now. And how long did that obsession last? 4 months, was it, before you'd had enough of them? Margaret said with a teasing nudge of her elbow. Oh, it was at least 6 months, John said, with a grin and a gentle nudge back. I could soon knock a new hutch together. It would be different with a kestrel. Imagine seeing it fly from your hand and return. That would be something else. Almost like experiencing flying yourself, or the closest thing to it, the freedom of it. Marge smiled and reached out for John's hand. A gust of wind caught them, and they looked up at the foreboding clouds as they walked up the hill in their brown leather boots. They had trodden this path before in their mill clogs, but they could be treacherously slippery in the wet, so they had saved the boots, the most expensive piece of clothing they had ever owned. John had cleaned and polished both pairs before they set off this morning. Every step he took in them paid off, and now, worn in, they were worth every penny and more that they had scrimped and saved together to buy them. John would only wear his clogs to work now. He hated shuffling about in them outside, when he could be striding tall in his boots, every step feeling secure and solid. These boots could not only carry him up hills. While wearing them, you felt like he could move mountains. The boots were a cut above the price he paid for them. He'd been offered an excellent deal on them by shoemaker Joseph Shufflebotham, due to John being a fellow member of the Social Democratic Federation. Joe's advice was always sound, no matter the problem, and he'd helped John find his feet and his voice in the Federation. Joe liked to see his comrades in the struggle well shod. John fondly remembered Joe saying he made these boots to aid our march to victory, accompanied by a slap on his back when picking the boots up. After a year's use over many hills, the boots had lost their new sheen and looked the part. Margaret's could be seen below the hem of the skirt she used for hill walking, just above the ankles, but high enough to get the women back home in Halliwell whispering when she passed. Their boots crunched steadily up the steep gravelly road. To the right, over a dry stone wall, sheep grazed a scrubby field rising to a ridge line that met the wild moor above it. To their left, the ground dropped away. It was marshy there, with reeds rustling and bending in the wind. Cattle were scattered down the hillside as it fell into Walker Fold to meet Dean Brook. A large dray cart with two hornies harnessed to it approached, creaking under the strain of a large load of hay bales. They stood to the side and exchanged nods with the driver, carefully coaxing the horses to a slow, steady descent down the steep hill. As they approached the gateway to the moorland track they needed to take, which stood on a fork branching off to the right of Coal Pit Road, John noticed a large red sign on a post beside it. "That looks new," John said, straining his eyes to read it, eventually making it out as saying the road was closed and that trespassers will be prosecuted. Walking up to the gate, they saw the large new padlock and substantial chain securing it. "That can't be right. We've always walked this way. Why close it now?" John said. Margaret rattled the gate furiously. "Damn it, this will make us awful late to Mum's. She'll be in a right grump. It'll take us ages to walk round. Let's ignore it and nip over." John placed his hands on the fence, scanning the ground on the other side as it rose to the nearby ridgeline. He didn't fancy walking round either, as there was more of a chance of getting a soaking if they walked back down the hill and took the long way round along Belmont Road. There was no one in sight. "OK, we'll risk it. But your mum's going to be a damn sight grumpier with me if she hears you've been prosecuted for trespassing." The chain and the gate rattled as John climbed onto it, and he was swinging his leg over when a man on a black horse came trotting over the rise. John raised his eyes to the sky. "Here we go," he thought, and sighed. Seeing John on the gate, the man wearing a brown derby hat and green tweed jacket cropped his horse into a canter and pointed at them menacingly. "Oi, you there, get off that gate," he cried, bringing his horse to a clattering halt uncomfortably close to the gate just as John stepped down. Margaret moved back quickly as the horse's head swung around and snorted its hot, humid breath into her face. She noticed the shotgun holstered at the back of the saddle and grabbed hold of John's arm. "Are you blind, man, or illiterate? Can you not read the sign? Trespassers will be prosecuted, and it means what it says. You cannot walk this way anymore without express permission from Colonel Ainsworth himself. Do you understand?" The horseman shouted at them as he struggled to settle his wild-eyed steed. Margaret clung tighter to John's arm and felt him stiffen with anger at the horseman's haranguing. "I can see and read fine," John said, "but what I read doesn't agree with me or my wife. We've always taken this route to Belmont without any bother. Her family walked this route for years before the Ainsworth even owned it. What right have you to close it, to deny us this way?" John said, glaring at the horseman gripping the gate's top rail with one hand. "What right, by God, you impudent swine? I have the right of the law of the land behind me. This is Colonel Ainsworth's land, and he's decided that we'll be close to anyone that invited. I'm Ainsworth's man, and I'm carrying out his will. That is the right, and there is none better. Why has he decided to block this path now? Margaret asked, standing firm. Grouse shooting. New hives have been built just up the road here, and he doesn't want the likes of you traipsing across worrying the birds and his guests while they are at their sport. Now be gone with you, and tell everyone this route is now closed. The likes of us worrying the birds? Margaret said, her voice rising angrily as she placed her hand on her chest. The birds would be a damn sight more worried by you lot blasting away at them with your guns than they would be by us peacefully walking past. I have walked this way since I was little. Let us through. There is no one shooting today. No gentry to worry with unrefined ways. Let us through. No, shut your mouth, woman. I'll take no cheat from you. The rider bellowed, spittle catching the bottom of his bushy black moustache, which crossed his red cheeks to join his substantial sideburns. You, man, keep your woman in order. Take her back home to the kitchen where she belongs. Go to hell. She will speak her mind when and where she pleases. She belongs on this hill as much as you or anyone else. We were born and bred in sight of this hill, John said, jabbing his finger at the rider. Why don't you bugger off and get back to Toady and to your lord and master? Margaret said. Tell him he needs to do the decent thing and open this track again. Margaret saw John was fuming and worried that he might get carried away. She put her arm through his to pull him around and away from the gate. Come on, let's go, love. We need to get a move on. John shouted, Toss her, over his shoulder at the horseman as he reluctantly allowed Margaret to lead him away from the gate. The red-faced rider watched them walk away and spotted the kestrel hovering nearby. He reached back to unholster the double-barrelled shotgun. It would be easier to take his horse closer, but the couple had pissed him off, and he wanted to see them jump. Swiftly taking aim, he discharged both barrels beside the gate. My lord, Margaret cried, startled by the noise, her hand rising to her chest, trying to encourage her heart to regain its place. John's simmering anger instantly overflowed into fury. He placed his arm around Margaret's shoulders and felt her shaking as they both turned towards the gate and saw the kestrel falling from the sky, with the barrels of the gun following its descent. The rider broke open the shotgun and reached into his pocket for fresh shells, looking at them with a face full of thunder, framed by the stormy sky behind him. Bastard, you will pay for that. You and Ainsworth haven't heard the last of this, John shouted, brandishing his fist at the rider. He wished Margaret wasn't there so he could pull him off the horse before he reloaded the gun. John stared at the rider, longing to get to grips with him, then drew Margaret, still shaking, closer to him, and they turned to march back down the hill. Right. So that's it. The first scene from To Boldly Go from my collection. If you want to hear the rest, buy this book. Bye.